Hello and welcome to the Neuroscience program that we have designed for students of assessment across the lifespan, a course run by Rosa Ali at UTS. My name is Dr. Sinan Ali and I am the co-founder and director of the Healthy Brain Body Academy, which is putting on a series of videos for students of assessment across the lifespan. A little bit about myself. I have been a long-standing academic at Macquarie University before I retired to head a private college before I founded the Healthy Brain Body Academy. I've been at Macquarie University for over 20 years, teaching final year students neurophysiology, as well as running a research program in my area of specialty, which is stress, which is very relevant to you guys. I was also the Associate Dean of the Australasian College of Health and Wellness before starting this venture. Look, this neuroscience program is designed to best coincide with the curriculum of assessment across the lifespan, which I'm sure Rosa has gone through with you, where you will start off looking at the adult brain, followed by the child brain, some skills testing before we look at MS and stroke, some case studies, followed by oral presentations. So throughout your curriculum of assessment across the lifespan, you will cover a number of key topics, and those are some of the key topics that we're going to be covering the neuroscience thereof. So in this program, we'll start off with an introduction like today to talk about neuroscience and its importance to health and wellness, its importance in everyday life, and how we view the world around us, how we perceive the world around us, its importance in mental health, emotions, and exactly how we behave. We'll then move on to the adult brain, so that will be the series of next few videos that we put on, looking at some nomenclature, looking at the location and the function of major areas of the brain, how these major areas of the brain interact with each other. We'll look at the peripheral nervous system, the enteric nervous system, before moving on to the child brain. So we'll look at the development of the brain from in utero all the way to the adult stage. We'll look at the cells that make up the brain, the neurons, and how these neurons communicate with each other through synapses, which is probably one of the most interesting and important topics to cover in terms of how the brain functions. During your week of MS and stroke, we'll look at the blood supply to the brain and how this impacts things like vascular disorders. The all-important concepts of neuroplasticity over the past few years is something that we will also cover. My area of specialty, which is stress and inflammation, and the effects of stress and inflammation on pretty much the functioning of the central nervous system and how it manifests itself, before looking at some strategies to increase neuroplasticity. So we really are talking about strategies to a better brain. But I think before we go any further and talk about neuroscience, let's just first define what that term means, that term neuroscience. It's a branch of science that deals with the anatomy, the physiology, the biochemistry, the molecular biology, if you like, of nerves, nervous tissue, and especially in relation to things like behaviour and emotions and learning, which really covers the psychology output component of it. So it really is a scientific study of the nervous system And it does provide us with an understanding of the biological basis to some of these psychological terms, such as learning, the memory, the behavior, the perception, consciousness, etc., etc. Now, when we mention the brain, and I've got a model of it here, and you'll see this model of the brain as we take it apart and show you different parts of it. When we mention the brain, what we really think about is this 2.5 pounds of mass encased within the cranium, and it is probably the most important and yet the least understood, the most complex and the least understood piece of tissue that we have in the body. The brain does everything to look after itself because it really is the seat of our consciousness. It really is a seat of how we perceive our world externally as well as internally. So the brain really does do everything in its power to look after itself. And I always say that the body is just a slave, is just a support system to keep this wonderful massive tissue alive. And how important the brain is really brought to us by the fact that if the brain is devoid of any nutrients, if the brain is devoid of things like oxygen, it changes the biochemistry, it changes the routing of things through the body, and it directs nutrients, oxygen, etc. to the brain so that the brain can stay at its optimal state. And one quick example that I'll tease you with, and we'll have many examples as we go through. One quick example is if the brain is devoid of oxygen, what does it do? It actually shuts the rest of the body down. When it shuts the rest of the body down, the body will actually drop. So that's what happens when you faint if you're not getting enough oxygen. If you're standing on parade, for example, as a soldier in a hot sunny day, on a hot sunny day for long periods of time without movement, very little oxygen flows to the body, and in some people that causes fainting. Regardless of the shape of body you have, regardless of the size of the body you have, you're going to fall, and regardless of which direction you fall in, your head is always going to be lower than the rest of your body. As a result of this, what tends to happen is that you get drainage of blood to the head and hence the brain to supply the brain with the remaining bits of all the low bits of oxygen that may be there. So it really is a selfish bit of tissue that tries to keep itself at optimum. Now, it's not just all one-way traffic. It's not everything that is to the body. There's actually two-way traffic. And the body has developed what we call the peripheral nervous system. So the brain and the spinal cord make up the central nervous system, and all the nerves that come from that to the rest of the body is called the peripheral nervous system. And the body has developed this in order to monitor everything that is going on in the body and to make adjustments to everything that's going on in the body. Why? It wants to keep the body in an optimal state so that the body in return can keep the brain operating pretty much at an optimal brain, at an optimal function. This, of course, is neuroscience that is operating in an ideal world where everything works perfectly fine. Of course, we don't live in an ideal world. And we do know, and we do know that things do go wrong and sometimes go drastically wrong. And a lot of these cases we can read about. For example, the late and great, brilliant Oliver Sacks. He's documented a number of cases where things can go quite drastically wrong in the brain. For example, the man who mistook his wife for a hat, as an example of that, and many examples throughout his popular books that Oliver Sacks has written. Now, they're the cases where things can go drastically wrong. It's often not things that do go drastically wrong, but there are subtle changes in the brain itself, the structure of the brain, and hence the function of the brain. Subtle changes in the chemical makeup of the brain, the neurotransmitters, for example. And these can lead to changes in some of the measurable traits like behavior and learning, emotions, etc. So it's not just these wonderful, weird cases that we come across that are popular in the psychological world and popular press, but the subtle changes that can lead to changes in perception, changes in behavior. The brain is what we say plastic, and research over the past 5 to 10 years has no doubt shown the brain to be quite adaptable and quite plastic. And this really is that term that we call neuroplasticity, and it's the ability of the brain to form new as well as reorganize existing connections. These are connections between neurons, and neurons communicate with one another through synapses. So it's the ability of the brain to form new synapses and to reorganize synapses that changes the structure of the brain, because these are the neurons, changes the structure of the brain, and therefore changes the function of the brain. And what's really been exciting over the past 5 years is that we now know about neuroplasticity, but we now know that an individual can actually alter and change their neuroplasticity through various means such as various challenges to the brain. So learning new things, challenging the brain when you're doing existing exercises or existing tasks. And all of these new tasks and these novel activities that we can undergo can lead to drastic changes in neuroplasticity. If it leads to drastic changes in neuroplasticity, we can actually alter the function of the brain in terms of learning and memory and behavior, etc., through simple strategies. And some of these strategies we'll cover later on in the neuroscience program. So I grew up in a world, and I used to teach this, and that is that your brain, you're born with every single brain cell you're going to have, and it's a downhill ride from there on, and it's a progressively downhill ride from there on. But we now know that individuals can facilitate those changes through certain actions that can slow down, that can halt, that can actually improve the function of that brain through subtle changes in structure and subtle changes, therefore, in the function of that brain. So this whole program is designed to give you the neuroscience basis to the structure and function of the brain and the underpinning of the biological basis of psychology, really. And this will make you more comfortable as you learn the nomenclature, as you learn the structures, as you learn the function. This will make you much more comfortable and much more proficient when you're reading reports for data analysis, for example, but also in communication, professional communication with other healthcare providers. So the whole program is designed to benefit your understanding, your learning of the neuroscience and the biological basis of psychology. At our next video, we will look at some of the basic nomenclature of the brain and some of the basic structures that are within the brain and talk about their functions. Thank you very much.